The biggest of all events in Jacksonville, though, and you can't say it's super because it was a tragic event, was the Great Fire of Jacksonville. This was the most momentous event in Jacksonville's history, and every point of our history is kind of calculated either before the fire or after the fire, because this is the centerpiece that had so much effect on this city, both before what happened before and what's happened since then. In fact, we can, I think, draw a direct line of what happened in the Great Fire to the Super Bowl coming to Jacksonville even now, simply because of the way the city got rebuilt and the enthusiasm our citizens have showed since then. But the Great Fire was an extraordinary event. It happened on a Friday afternoon, right at noontime. A mattress factory over in La Villa caught fire, and the flames shot up in the air, carrying these sparks of moss over the little wooden buildings across the town, just as the wind came up and created a firestorm that swept these flames and burning embers across our city. And the story of this can be wonderfully seen in the book that we did for the Historical Society called The Great Fire of 1901, that I would urge your viewers, if you've not seen this book, to get it, because it does tell the story in greater detail than we have time for here. But rest assured, this was a fire of epic proportions. It was the third largest city fire in the history of the United States during that early time. And the flames could be seen glowing in the sky as far away as Miami and Savannah. And it was a terrific holocaust as people fled. And there are quite a few pictures of the Great Fire in the new book that we've published, showing the look of horror on the faces of people as they fled the city burning down. A 2-mile by 1-mile swath of downtown Jacksonville was wiped out, taking with it 90% of what was then the downtown area of Jacksonville. And the day after the fire, it looked like a wasteland. Miraculously, only 7 people died, but several thousand buildings were destroyed, and it was just an awful event where most people lost everything they owned. And yet, in the midst of this disaster, something miraculous happened. As people wandered through the rubble and looking at these burned out buildings and skeletons of what had been once familiar churches and schools and hotels were all gutted, they came about with an idea that this was a wonderful town worth saving, although it's kind of hard to see from these photographs, and that they would rebuild the city and reach a new level of glory. And by gosh, it happened. They called in the military to guard whatever there was worth guarding, and the people whose houses were burned out pulled together as best they could, and the city fathers and mothers and leaders set about a plan to rebuild the city that was awesome. They set up food lines, commissaries, to feed the over 10,000 people who were left homeless and without jobs. They set up building committees and transportation committees and fundraising committees. Money flowed in from all over the world. This fire made headlines in every major newspaper, and thousands of dollars and dozens of train cars came in bringing relief supplies as the city made its way to rebuild from this great catastrophe. And here you see kind of the spirit of people working together to rebuild from the ashes. Miraculously, within less than a year after the fire, hundreds and hundreds of buildings had already been rebuilt. Here you see one of the larger buildings on the right of this photograph is the Windsor Hotel, burned out in the Great Fire, but was one of the first big buildings rebuilt. The fire was in May of 1901, and this building opened its doors in February of 1902. And here on the left, you see in an empty lot, a new house has just shot up. In the background, more and more houses, more and more buildings being rebuilt, and beautiful buildings, not just buildings of a backwoods frontier town, but very elegant buildings in styles that were brought to this city by architects and developers and entrepreneurs who poured into the city to get a piece of the action of rebuilding what was one of the most prominent cities in the South at that time. And as these buildings went up, technology was changing also, so that reinforced concrete and steel allowed us to build not just 1- and 2-story buildings, but skyscrapers, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 stories tall that literally scraped the sky, that used elevators and plate glass windows to make Jacksonville truly one of the most modern cities in America, leading all the way up to the great city that has become now with our current frenzy of football in the modern era, Super Bowl. We've had many super events in the past, But now I think we're experiencing the Super Bowl and showing what Jacksonville really is to the rest of the world.
It was wonderful, Wayne. And that was also a peek at what was in this wonderful book, as well as some of these events. And I'll just mention just a few more, and I know that they're covered in the book as well. Of course, other huge events in the city's history would include the silent movie era. I mean, that would be another era as well.
We'll have to come back and
Oh,
do this again
of
super events that have happened since the Great Fire of Jacksonville. And part of the way the book is constructed is it takes a look at each one of these eras and shows some of the best photographs that show what Jacksonville was like during that time. And I think your viewers will enjoy the leisure of looking through pages of pictures that they've never seen before that shows a Jacksonville that's hard to imagine, that can only be seen through the wonders of photography, that is like a time machine that takes us back to a long ago time.
The leisure looking at, I'm going to try lifting this now and I'll look like such a wimp, 432 pages. This new book, published 2005, February 2005. It is just enormous, and I believe when it was weighed up, it was 6.7 pounds. That's my memory. And I will have to tell everybody, because I've had the pleasure of working with it and seeing the book, it is without doubt the most beautiful book ever published, ever written, ever authored on Jacksonville history. Just beautiful.
Well, thank you. If we have a few minutes, I'd like to show a few of the pictures that we've included in the book that most people have never seen before. One of my favorite little ditties in Jacksonville history was Dixieland Park. This place was like something else that you've never seen before. It was a briefly opened amusement park on the south bank of Jacksonville, about where the Main Street Bridge is, the Museum of Science and History. And it had a little roller coaster. It had this wonderful Byzantine sort of architecture with great turrets and towers and exposition hall. And here you can see the ladies and gentlemen in their finery with their bustles and tall silk hats, strutting around, promenading and showing their stuff in what was a wonderful showplace of Jacksonville as an entertainment amusement park. There was a dance hall, a skating rink, there was all kinds of little restaurants, and it was an attempt to put Jacksonville back in the mainstream of a place that you'd want to come and have entertainment. And it was very popular in Jacksonville, although there was a big fire there, and after about 4 or 5 years it finally fizzled out again. But these rare shots, I don't think most of these have ever been published before, much less seen by your viewers, show a brief glimpse of this wonderful little Xanadu called Dixieland Park.
Again, another super event or episode in the city's history, absolutely.
And we've got lots of them too. If we have time, I'll show you another one.
Well, let's try, okay, another super event in the city's history. Let's do it.
After the fire, about 2 years later, they decided to have a big celebration, and it was an exhibition accompanied with a great parade that was called the Floral Parade. There were about 40 cars in Jacksonville in 1903 when this occurred, and every one of them was in this parade, decked out with flowers and all gussied up with every carriage, every bicycle in town, paraded up and down the streets. And this grand display, kind of like the Rose Bowl parade of its time, was, again, one more super event in Jacksonville that celebrated the city's rise from the ashes, its can-do spirit, the fact that we're a city to be reckoned with, and that we are a super quality city in the world.
And that was 1903, and at the time, what the city was also showing off, as well as touting its comeback, at that point in time, more cars had been gathered in one place in the state of Florida than any other time in the state's history, and that was a total of 33 automobiles.
Amazing.
I don't know how many of them were running at the time of the parade, pushing them along, but nonetheless, there it was. Again, just fabulous events in our city's history, all chronicled in this wonderful book that I have to say the Jacksonville Historical Society, we're so proud to have published this. And this is indeed The third book that we've published that you have been either directly authored or have been heavily involved in producing. And so we have the wonderful the Jacksonville Family Album, 150 Years of the Art of Photography. People can check our website, www.jackshistory.com, to find out when that book will be out, and it will be out in February, first part of February. Then we have also The Great Fire of 1901. You authored that in, indeed, 1901. Wonderful book right here, and this has been so popular. People always said, gee, we didn't know such a large book could be written on a fire. Well, we could have written one twice this big, you could have, and then now we've come out with one, I think, twice this big, and could have done twice that. And of course, Jacksonville's architectural heritage, we were not lucky enough to publish this one. This was your first really huge book.
That came out in 1989.
Yes, and the best local book seller, say that for me, in the history of the city.
I think it's sold over 20,000 copies now, and somebody said it was on more coffee tables than any other book in Florida.
Well, I can easily believe that. It is the Bible for Jacksonville history. It's been a pleasure having you here, Wayne. You've done so much to save the city's history, and we thank you for that. And this book will be another piece of that. And thank you for being a super guest, bringing the stories of the super events that have gone throughout our city's history leading up to this Super Bowl era and period in our time.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Wayne. That's all we have for the Jacksonville History Show. Thank you for being with us. Join us on www.jackshistory.com. See you next time.